Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's webinar on Alumni Career Insights. I'm Kim Yousey-Elsener, and I'm the Alumni Surveys Research Fellow at Lightcast. In addition, I'm a visiting research associate professor for higher education at Binghamton University here in sunny Binghamton, New York. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about some career insights that were received from the NACM survey from last year. We're currently finishing up this year's round of NACM data, so we look forward to sharing any new insights that we find this summer and next fall. We're going to be talking about the ones that we just figured out from the 2022 survey round. I'm going to start with what is the NACM survey, in case some of you are not familiar with the NACM survey. It stands for the National Alumni Career Mobility Survey. It is a survey that's administered once a year with campus partners from across the nation, where we are asking alumni 5 and 10 years after graduation some information that I'm going to share with you today. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of logistics so you know how to interact when we're on this webinar. First, if you'd like to chat, there is a chat feature. Feel free to go ahead and use that to communicate, to ask questions, to say hello. I love it to know who's here, so if you want to chat and go ahead and say hello from wherever you are, feel free to do that in the chat as we're talking and getting started. If you have specific questions that you'd like me to address, I ask if you put that in the question area in the Q&A section. That allows me to be able to see specific questions you want me to address and be able to see them a little bit better than having to dig through the chat. And then finally, we are recording this session, so please be aware of that as we're going through. And with that, we're going to dive in. I'm going to start with some foundations so you can get familiar a little bit with what the NACM survey is and what kind of information we're going to be looking at, and then we'll dig into some of the findings. And then scattered throughout this are some quotes that I found along the way. So this one's directly from the NACM report, but I think it sums up pretty well what the NACM report is all about. So NACM data tries to reach beyond sort of this understanding of just what alumni are doing, whether it's their career pathways or whether it's their impression on satisfaction or return on investment, and actually tries to loop that data back with their experiences while they were at the institution. And that allows campuses to actually have actionable data. So it's not just, hey, this is how our alumni are feeling about us, or hey, this is where our alumni landed after graduation, but also a little bit more of, and here's how we can start making changes on our campus in order to improve those experiences for future alumni. And to me, that's really important. I'm a professor of higher education, and right now, higher education in particular is really thinking about how they can change. And alumni data can be an important piece to understanding what changes to make and where to put resources. So some people ask me, so why NACM? Like, why did NACM even get created? And here are some things that I've been thinking about lately as I've been doing my work. But this idea that there are calls for quantifying the value of higher education. It seems like every day I get yet another news feed from some organization that is spouting or talking about the conversation around return on investment, or how do we actually talk about or quantify the value of higher education? Is higher education worth it? Yes, it is. No, it's not. Here's why. So there's a lot of that going on. There's some rankings that are out there that are trying to quantify it, but we all know that there's some limitations there. And so it's pretty difficult around this idea of how do we sort of articulate that value, especially to the multiple constituencies that higher education has. So I think one of the pieces to it that I talk about with students a lot is that higher education is really complex. It's not quite as simple as a business who might be able to say, this is what we can offer you and this is the value of it, because higher education is multifaceted. We have a lot of different missions going on all at once in higher education. So that makes it a little bit more complex at figuring out how to then articulate value. So what I've been finding is the recommendations out there are really saying you need both. You need both more objective measures, which we're pretty good at grabbing, like salary, job titles, where people are going, who their employers are, and things like that. But you need to be able to combine that with more what researchers call subjective or sentiment data. And that's really how people are feeling about their experience. And when you combine those together, you really get a better picture of what that return on investment or value is in higher education. But in addition to that, institutions are being called on to change. So if they can demonstrate their value and also articulate to their potential students, to their graduates, and say not just this is where your education can get you after that first destination, right after college, which is important information to have, but then start looking at, and here's how it contributes to your long-term success as an alumni. And that alumni sentiment data really helps us sort of loop back beyond and have some actionable data. If you think about it, if we're just looking at salary, if we're just looking at career pathways, it's an important piece to it. But it also leaves us with limited actions on a campus, right? The best we can do is funnel more graduates to those high-paying jobs or those that have strong career path, which is important to do. But then also thinking about how do we combine that with stories around our graduates who may choose to go into professions that are very well needed in this world, but may not be on that high salary perspective. I think about the people who are educators is one example, like me. So NACM data helps sort of fill all of that information in and round out the information you have when it comes to first destination, when it comes to salary and career paths, to give you an even better perspective, more stories to share, some depth to the information you have, but also lead to putting resources and strategically planning how you transform some practices on your campus. So a little bit more about the survey itself. There are 6 themes that the survey collects information around. So lots of different questions, but generally they kind of clump up into these 3 themes. So one is career pathways. So the survey does collect information on where graduates are going, what level they're at, what kind of employment they've had since they've graduated, what their salary is, what their salary was, some sort of historical perspective on salary. It also asks them some more, sentiment-related questions. Are they happy in their career? Do they see growth in their career? Have they found a path that they see themselves staying on? Things like that. The next is career satisfaction, which sort of plays off of that. So again, happy with the career. Do they have responsibilities that they felt that they were prepared for college? Do they see growth? Items such as that. Economic mobility on this survey is measured through and in relationship to alumni's perspective on where they are at now, where they think they will be in the future, in relationship to the household in which they grew up. So it's really meant to sort of get at that mobility piece in a way that's asking them how they're feeling about where they're at financially and where they think they're going. In addition, we do ask some questions around student loan debt, which we're finding, and you're going to see a little bit later, finding to be a key part of addressing some of the challenges we have with return on investment and equity in higher education. But it also asks questions around education satisfaction. So again, how did they feel about their experiences? Did they feel like their experiences helped prepare them for their career? Is there an understanding of sort of how those experiences actually contributed to life after college? And then next, we asked them to just tell us a little bit about what experiences they actually had. So if you're a person who does the NESE or familiar with the National Study on Student Engagement, it does ask some questions around those high impact practices. And if people engaged in practices like study abroad, were they student athletes? Did they belong to fraternity and sorority? Do they do internships? Did they do undergraduate research? Those kinds of things, as well as the NACE competencies, the competency areas that the National Organization for Career in Higher Education says graduates should be graduating with. So we asked some questions to get their self-reflection on how their degree helped them develop those skills. And then last, we asked some questions around community engagement. For some campuses, this is really important to them. It's a core part of their mission to help students get connected with the community and help them understand why it's important to stay connected in their communities and contribute back to their communities. And so many campuses want to measure that not just during the student's experience, but also thinking about how that continues after they graduate. So it allows them to get some data around that. Then if you think about, okay, those are the questions that the NACM asks, so what are the results we get? Without getting into too much detail, basically you get results in 5 that focus around 5 research factors. So basically one of them is career pathway preparation. So this idea of, did graduates feel prepared with their career, and do they feel like their institution helped them with that? The next one is institutional career investment. Did they feel that their institution actually invested in that career development while they were there? Career satisfaction is pretty simple. It's pretty similar to the research question or the survey themes in that are they happy? Do they see development? Do they see professional growth? Economic mobility, pretty similar to what's in the survey that I already described, and then community engagement. But what I like about it is the results also connect you with actionable insights. So not just does it give you just the information on those themes, but then it also ties those themes to things that you can think about doing on your campus. And more specifically, these three areas. So one is return on investment. How are you doing? Do your graduates feel that there's value to your degree? And then also that connects with what we call high impact career practices. And those are the practices that the data has found to be linked with some of the things like career preparation, institutional career investment, career satisfaction, economic mobility. These are practices that we're finding when we mix in all of the NESI high impact practices, the NACE competencies that are having the greatest impact on that alumni success. And then finally, equity gaps. Our campuses are able to take this data and disaggregate it by certain demographic groups, and that gives them an insight into whether they are actually having success across all groups, or whether there's some groups that they need to actually think about and maybe change structures and barriers for them so that they can specifically find the same success as other students on their campus. We're going to dig into some of these actionable insights in a minute. But before I do that, I want to give you a little bit about the high impact career practices, because those are usually the things out of the three I listed. People are like, oh, tell me more about those. So again, these are the practices that our data has said if most contribute to things like career preparation, institutional career investment, economic mobility for graduates. So these were experiences that they had. Now, if you're a person on a campus who works with high impact practices, I did for the bulk of my career. I'm a learning communities gal, I'm an internship gal, I'm an undergraduate research, study abroad, things like that. Those are high impact practices that are recommended by the NESI survey, the National Study for Student Engagement. These actually complement those. I've done a lot of work with the NESI folks to think about, okay, how do we increase the integrity of the experiences that our students are having, and how do we increase the intentionality behind them? And these high impact career practices have been found to have long-term impacts for alumni 5 and 10 years out. So whereas the high impact practices contribute to student success with retention and graduation, these high impact career practices, if you can integrate them into your learning, also give alumni success 5 and 10 years out after graduation. And that's what our data is finding. So these are things like understanding your career opportunities. So how are we embedding an understanding of how students explore what careers are out there, where they can go, what they can do while they're doing their degree? The next one is creating a plan for their career. So sometimes that's easy. If you want to do something like get into law school, there's specific steps you can take, or medical school. But sometimes that plan can shift, can change, can develop as you're going along, as you're exploring career opportunities, your plan changes. So really giving students the opportunity to understand how they develop tools to think about how they plan for their career, not just for that first job, but for an actual career beyond graduation. The next one is networking with employers, not just giving opportunities for networking with employers, but actually teaching people the skills of how to go about networking with employers, how to make those connections, how to reach out, in what ways, in what manner, and then getting them to feel comfortable with that networking. The next one is receiving helpful career advice. This one has a little bit of pieces to it. So it's receiving helpful career advice, great. Even better, helpful career advice from faculty is having some of the best impacts in our data. If you're wondering why, well, if you think about it, most of our alumni are saying they went to faculty while they were a student to receive that career advice. And so faculty have a very high impact on that piece. If they have the helpful career advice, then they can be they can have a lot of influence for our students. The next one is employers. So if someone's working while they're also getting their degree, getting career advice from those employers, they also say has a really great impact. And then I also want to say that the statistics are slowly starting to show, as we get more data, also all those other important people like career center counselors, academic advisors who are not faculty, mentors, and things like that. Those are all also having an impact. I think statistically they're not quite there yet, and if you want my opinion, it's because they don't have as far of a reach. If you think about faculty, everyone has contact with faculty. Some of those other offices, it just depends on the structure of your institution. But they too also can give helpful career advice, which is great for alumni. And then finally, internships related to a career. So not just doing an internship, but thinking about how that internship relates to a student's understanding of their career goals, how it relates to their understanding of career opportunities, of creating a career plan. All of these things can be worked together. So those are the high impact career practices. So keep those in mind as we're talking, because I think those are probably the biggest, most juiciest, actionable piece out of all this data. So I'm going to head into the research findings real quick and give you a little idea of what we were finding in last year's data. So we're going to focus just on the undergraduate students who responded to the survey. We do survey both undergraduate and graduate students, but for this, I thought we'd focus it down into the undergrads. So people are usually wondering, okay, what is this data and what does it kind of look like? So to give you an idea of some of the basic demographics, you can see, sort of who we got the information from. So a little over 9,000 responses. Class of 2017 and the class of 2022. Class of 2017 was most represented at 56%, and I'm sorry, I said 2022, I meant 2012. 60% identified as female, the remaining 40% identified either as male or another gender identity. 26% identified as first generation. 84% obtained their degree between the ages of 17 and 24, so the what most people call the traditional age college student, and 83% identified as white. And if you're wondering where they came from, just a couple of information about the institutions. So 38 participating institutions, 53% of them were public, 47% were large. And then you can see sort of a spread across the United States, with the largest group coming from the Midwest, followed by the Northeast. So with that, I'm going to kind of frame this conversation around the data and what we're kind of finding in it. And I wanted to start with this quote because I found it the other day and I thought it was really interesting. I think it's something that I probably live every day, but I would never really have the words for it. But this idea of how do you frame the conversation around value in higher education? And one of the things that is there is this idea of a social contract. Just like we're all willing to spend money on things like cars, houses, because we can see the value that we might get back for it. That same logic is there for higher education, but it's also a little bit off this social contract. Students and families are willing to pay a certain amount or take on a cost of higher education with the understanding that they're going to get something back from it, higher paying jobs, better job security, and things like that. So I think that's a good way to sort of start thinking about how to frame this conversation. So I'm going to start with return investment, since we're, sort of that quote kind of sets us up for what is the story behind the social contract? And this is what we're seeing in the data. We really have three measures of return investment in the NACM survey. So I'm going to put all three of them up there for you. The first one is just a question of, are you satisfied with your educational experience? And if you'll see that 82% of our respondents said they either strongly agreed with the statement that they were satisfied with their educational experience. That's great. 82%. It's wonderful. Clearly had a great educational experience. When you add in, the folks that were in the middle, in the neutral, it's another 10%. That's really great story for higher education. And then when you change that return investment a little bit more and phrase it in the cost factor. So was my degree worth the tuition I paid? You'll notice that strongly agree went down to 55%. So now we're looking at half of the respondents said, yes, my degree was worth the tuition I paid. So that means that almost half of them disagreed with that statement. So that shows us we've got a little bit of work to do. And then when you take it a little bit more and say, my degree was worth my student loan debt. So another, the way I see it, like my degree was worth the sacrifice I made, after graduation of paying it back. It drops down to 44% who strongly agreed. So that tells me that higher education has some work to do around return investment. And what I see it as, clearly we have some great educational experiences. So how do we talk about that social contract narrative of, I'm investing some money and what am I getting back? Where do I see the worth there? So it's great. We need to maintain that quality educational experience, but then how do we tweak that perception of value a little bit more? So for me, I need to understand the why, like why are people actually getting a degree before I can think about how I can impact their impression on the value and worth of their degree. So we also ask our alumni during the survey, what is their motivation? Why did they even try to get this degree? And I think we have a lot of assumptions around this. At least I've always had some when I were working in higher education. And so it's really good to have some data around this. And you'll notice the top four many of them are around career, right? Career success, required for my career aspirations, financial gain. So those are all, what I would think about career, career related things, career related motivations. But you'll notice the second one is intellectual development. And the thing that struck me about this data is I've often been on conversations in higher education where we talk about it as an or proposition. So students are interested in intellectual development. They tend to go to, the humanities. They're the liberal arts folks. They might be the philosophy majors and things like that. Or students want a career, and so they tend to be teachers, engineers, management folks, nurses, public health, those kinds of majors that are more career specific. But really what this data is telling us is our alumni want and. So it's not an or. They're coming because they want both educational, intellectual development and career development. And our students and our alumni are seeing that as really linked, whereas as institutions, we often think about them as separate. So one of the ways we need to think about their assessment of value of their educational experience is how do we bring that and closer together so they're getting both intellectual development and career development throughout their experiences. So the next thing I sort of asked the data was, okay, so when do they need to get this career information, right? Because is it just about finding a job? Is it something else? And so one of the questions we ask is, when did you actually decide on your career path? And you'll notice that the bulk of the people who responded to the survey were figuring that out either during their bachelor's degree experience or after that. And I love to give a hats off to the 16% who said they're still feeling like they're deciding, because I feel like in reality, I think many of us are on that path as well. So we're going to shout out to those folks in particular. But overwhelmingly, students are making these decisions while they're getting their degree and after. And so that tells me that it's not just about your resume and your cover letter and finding that first job, but then how are we integrating these skills? How are we thinking about career more holistically so that students have the tools they need after they graduate when they're still making these decisions? And then finally, we ask them, did you feel like your institution helped prepare you for a career? And did you feel like your institution invested in your career? And you'll see that the numbers are not probably where we want them to be for higher education. So 47% scored high. So career preparation is actually what we call a factor. So it has multiple questions that feed into it. So the reason why you're seeing high there instead of strongly agree or strongly agree or agree is because it becomes a factored. So we actually have a scale of 1 to 5. So we consider high 4 to 5. So 47% of people scored high in career preparation, 19% on institutional career investment. So you can start to see how these pieces are coming together, right? If we want to think about how we increase those numbers on return investment, how we get alumni to see the value in higher education, then we have to meet them where they're at, which is both intellectual development and career development. And they need career development that gets them thinking about their career beyond graduation. So they have the tools after they graduate to also think about career planning. And right now we're falling short on that. And so one of the ways we can better capture the value and better help our students see value in their experiences is to bring all these pieces together. And what I love about the NACM data is it can give you a little bit of insight into how to do that, because I always love getting to that point and you're like, that's all a great storyline, but what am I supposed to do about it, right? That's another big problem. And we've got a lot of big challenges in higher ed right now. So tell me some solutions. So let's talk about what the data is telling us about the solutions. The first thing that's sort of overwhelmingly throughout the data is this idea of student loan debt. I'll get into it a little bit more, but basically this is the concept here. Student loan debt is statistically associated with, or have a relationship with, positive perceptions of the value of degree. So, okay, that makes sense, right? Someone has student loan debt might affect their impression of whether their degree was worth it, whether their student loan debt was worth it. But what about student loan debt? What can we do about that? There's really two things. One is the amount of student loan debt. So people who have much, much larger levels of student loan debt are less likely to say it was worth it. Pretty logical, but it's great to have the data that tells you that, right? And that is statistically significant if there's some statisticians out there. And then also the people who have student loan debt are less likely to say, well, actually I shouldn't say, let me step back there. People who say that their student loan debt is manageable are more likely to say that it was worth it. So the people who are struggling to pay off their student loan debt are also starting to question the value of their degree and the value of that student loan debt. So really, one of the things we can do is look at our student loan policies and say, okay, how are we making this so that the people who are taking out loans, how do we make it so it's manageable and make it so that it's a value that an amount that they can actually pay off in a reasonable amount of time? So that's one thing we can do. If we can also look at it from an equity lens, because I think it's really important and fair to point out that student loans are not equal for all groups in higher education. There's lots of research out there that will tell you that. And if you want to learn more, let me know. I can send you some sources. But in the NACM data itself, this is some of the things that it's finding. So first generation, so students who identified as first generation and respondents who identified as Black African American were statistically more likely to still be paying their student loan debt. So we already have two groups that are already paying they're more likely to be still paying their loan debts 5 and 10 years after they graduate. So right there, we've got an equity gap in that these two groups are having more of a burden when it comes to student loans. And then we asked everyone, also the people who had student loan debt, is it overwhelming? We actually ask, is it overwhelming? We also ask, is it manageable? We asked both questions, and believe it or not, the data pretty much lines up on both of them as far as, sort of the same groups are, finding the same thing. So thinking about what's more overwhelming, the same groups, so first generation, Black African American, and several other historically marginalized groups are also statistically more likely to say that their student loan debt is overwhelming. So we have an equity gap there. So more student loan debt, finding it overwhelming. And these groups are also statistically more likely to say that their degree was not worth it. And so we've got some equity things to think about, specifically in our student loan practices in higher education, to think about how we make sure that we are thinking about our structures, our policies, and thinking about it from a perspective of how do we make sure that this is equitable for everyone, with especially being attuned to, are these debts manageable? And are they able to pay them off in a reasonable amount of time? And are they not overwhelming? So those are some things to think about. And that's one thing that will help with that perception of value of degree. So we've got student loan debt. The next thing is career. So thinking about this, debt is one thing, but then the other piece, and this is just a quote that gives you a little bit more information about some of the equity gaps that some of the research is finding. If you're looking for more things to look at, this is a good article to check out. So let's talk about, how this also combines with career. Now, there's a lot of bars going on here. So if you're looking at the screen, you're like, whoa, it's a lot of bars. What I really want you to do is look on the left-hand side, right? That's my degree is worth the tuition. So this combines my degree is worth the tuition with people who scored low, medium, and high on career pathway preparation. So did they feel that their institution helped them prepare them for the career? And if you're a person like me, what I want you to really look at is the pattern. So if you look at the people who scored low, which are on the left, you'll see that their first bar is high, and then it goes downward. So the people who scored low on career preparation were more likely to strongly disagree that their degree was worth their tuition, and then it goes down from there. But if you look at the one on the right-hand side where it says high career preparation, you'll see that it goes the other way. So they are more likely to strongly agree that their degree was worth their tuition. Same pattern, a little bit different, but same pattern on the right-hand side where my degree is worth my student loan debt. So you'll notice that the people who scored low on career preparation, more likely to strongly disagree, and goes down from there. And the same pattern going up, more likely to strongly disagree or strongly agree if you're a high career preparation. So what this is really showing me, and the statistics play it out as well, that people are more likely to say the people who have high career preparation, they felt like their campus helped them prepare for their career, are more likely to say that their degree is worth it and that their student loan debt was worth it. So we're seeing this connection between career preparation and value. So we can fix that, right? There's some things we can do to help make that connection better and stronger for our graduates. The next question was institutional career investment, and you'll notice the same sort of down and up pattern if you're looking at the left and the right columns. You can enjoy the middle too if you want, but I like the exteriors. So those who scored low on institutional career investment were more likely to strongly disagree that their degree was worth their tuition, and those who scored high in institutional career investment were more likely to strongly agree that their degree was worth their tuition. And similar pattern for student loan debt, although you'll notice the bars are a little bit more wonky there. So really what I'm seeing here is maybe not as strong of a case, but still a pretty strong case that institutions who invest in alumni and students' careers while their students actually see get that return by students being more favorable in their ratings for return on investment. So there is a link between career and return on investment. So how do you go about changing that, right? Like, give me some action steps. So one thing that you can do is focus on those high impact career practices. So we found that those who engaged in the high impact career practices were statistically more likely to agree that their degree was worth their tuition and that it was worth their student loan debt. So these high impact career practices are related to the concepts that will help you get to career preparation and institutional career investment. The thing I love about them is that they will help, they're broad enough that you can integrate them into lots of different experiences. So for example, right now, I teach in a higher education practice program, and we are actually thinking about how do we take these high impact career practices and intentionally think about how we're using those in our courses, how we're getting our students to think about that. One of the things that I did this year was we actually talked about using organization administration. So it's a class on how colleges work. I know you're all thinking fascinating, right? But what we did was we actually used that as an opportunity for students to explore career opportunities and explore different cultures of higher education and where that might lead them in their career path and their skill set. So you can do it in lots of different ways. Putting on the equity lens one more time, if you really want to focus in on high impact career practices, usually the next question is which one can I choose, right? Which one's going to give me the most bang for my buck? There's not one that overwhelmingly influences any others, but we did find when we put on the equity lens that there are three that there's equity gaps in. So alumni who identified as from historically marginalized identity groups were saying that they didn't get these three career experiences. So they were less likely to network with employers. They were less likely to have their institution help them create a plan for their career. And they were less likely to understand career opportunities. So if you really want to bring up those things and you want to think about very specifically how to close those equity gaps, these three are a good place to start. And in particular, thinking about how you're embedding that in places in the curriculum, in other places on your campus that will reach all students, and maybe not just those who select into certain programs or select into coming into different offices. A couple of examples that I can give you. I just gave you mine for my class, but here are three more that are actually, if you want to read more, they're in the report, and we will share the link to the report for you at the end so you can get to it if you'd like. One was Minnesota State University, and they really, really, really wanted to dig into this idea of thinking about structural barriers to equity on their campus. And they were particularly interested in first-generation students and a couple other specific identities. So the first thing they did is they dove into their NACM data and really started pulling it apart by certain populations and started to think about where are we seeing the gaps? Where are we seeing that some students are getting these experiences and other students are not getting these experiences? Where are we seeing this play out in the data so that we can better think about our strategic plan and our strategic priorities things and think about how we can change what we're doing to better address those things. So it's a great example of how they very strategically just dove in with pulling apart the data from very specific lens in order to get at an idea of where they wanted to go and what changes they wanted to make. Belmont University took a similar approach, but in a slightly different way. They started comparing to their peers, because one thing the NACM does is it gives you access to, if you participate, you get access to the national data that you can compare yourself against, as well as a peer group. Usually those peer groups are public-private. And so Belmont dove in and actually started comparing themselves against their peers. They really wanted to see how they were doing, and they used that as their litmus test. And the one thing that really, really stuck out to them, because it was a conversation they were already having on our campus, was thinking about this idea of career planning. They really were like, wow, we're behind on our peers on this. And we really want to think about this strategically from a campus perspective. So they actually latched onto that one high impact career practice because they thought it was really important for their students and for their campus. And then they started a campus-wide effort to actually think about, what does career planning look like for them, for their students, for their different academic disciplines, for their different interests, for their different career pathways that the students were taking after they graduated. And they thought about a multi-level approach, actually almost a curriculum for what students can do first, second, third, fourth year as they're developing, as they're thinking about career planning, and how that changes from one year to another as they're going through their programs. So they really, and they have an assessment plan, they're tracking it, they're doing all sorts of really cool stuff to think about. Their goal is that every 100% of their students, when they graduate, they have a solid career plan that they've been spending years developing as they were there and integrating with both their out of classroom and in classroom experiences. And the last one I want to highlight is Metro State University in St. Paul, Minnesota. They did a lot of work with bringing their NACM data together with other data sources. So they have their first destination data, but they also just did a huge project on their campus for strategic planning. So they brought together a ton of evidence and information for their strategic planning process. And they also did a student journey mapping project, which they actually looked at more qualitatively. They talked to students and talked about what their journey looked like. They have they're actually very high on adult student population. So a little bit reversed probably from many traditional campuses. And so they felt like they really need to understand their unique students and their pathways. But more importantly, they wanted to find out where the barriers were to their success. And what they were finding over and over again in that Student Journeys project was a lot of the barriers were about career. It was actually lining up with things like internships and understanding career opportunities and networking with employers and understanding how to make a career plan. Those things were all lining up together. So they triangulated their data with other data sources. They used NACM to help the conversation, but also contribute the other data sources to bring it all together to actually really think about how they wanted to do this, how they wanted to implement this on their campus, get buy-in for that on their campus, and then actually think about strategically how they were going to move forward. And it turned into an entire campus project. It was really fascinating to see them pull all this data together. And I'm a huge fan of triangulating data, so I always like to highlight that one. So where can you start? Because I always like to leave you with some sort of recommendation, right? So where can you start? The first thing is, I think alumni data is very valuable. Ensure that you're collecting it, but I especially want to highlight that word robust. Just, make sure that the data you have is data that you can use for information. Alumni data is classically very difficult to get. Surveys are difficult for people to get responses to. We'll talk about that in a minute. But also the idea of then how do we also think about career pathways, and how do we also put salary and some of those other things that people are interested in into the conversation, and how do we pull all that together? And to me, what Metro State did is actually sort of the ideal, right? The idea of how do you pull multiple data sets together to give you a more full picture? And that's really what probably robust alumni data should look like. Then also amplify those high impact career practices throughout a student life cycle. So that if you can think about how you can implement some of those career preparation into your process, then you should start seeing results in your data later on. And then finally, how do you strategically address those equity gaps? Now, I gave you some general equity gaps. You might have other populations on your campus that you're more focused on. So how do you think about how you collect data to help inform your equity gaps? And a little bit more about, so how can you do that? I just wanted to share a little bit about how Lightcast can help you do that, of course. Alumni Pathways is a great way to think about that idea of triangulating data. How do I get multiple data sources all talking together in one place so that I can make an informed decision? Because any one piece gives you one piece of the picture. But if you have it all together, then you can make much better and much more informed decisions. So one way you can do that is the idea of tracking outcomes. I think we're all getting better at that, right? First destination processes for that, first job out or grad school out are becoming more robust, but also tracking those outcomes over a longer period of time give you a better idea of what that pathway looks like, because many people change along the way, as we know. And so tracking that information will help you. And there's lots of tools at Lightcast that can help you think about, how can you pull insights out of that tracking data? Where can you think about how you're viewing those career paths and where people are going that help you inform what you need to do while they're there to help them get prepared for those things. And it also reduces the time. It can be a lot faster if you have a robust data set to work from rather than you trying to create those data sets, because it's often data sets that are more difficult to get to for a higher education institution. Then finally, how do you, or second, I guess, add that to the idea of the sentiment data? So much of this NACM data I shared to you are alumni perceptions. These are what alumni think about their experiences. And when you put them together with the tracking information, you end up with a much more robust picture of what that looks like. Now you not only have, hey, our alumni are growing and thriving in their careers, but this is how they feel about it. And these are the experiences they had while they were here that helped them get there. And these are the alumni who might be struggling that we want to make sure that there's less of them struggling in the future. So what did they maybe not experience that the others did, and how do we identify how we change that? So alumni data can really help you if you look at the survey data and combine it with the tracking information. Then you've got a much larger picture. And then finally, I think the biggest thing of that, it's great to have all this data, but how do I communicate that? How do I make sense out of that? Making sense out of data, it can take a lot of time unless you have something that makes it easy for you. And Lightcast pulls all that data together for you in easy to use formats that you can grab and use. And to me, that's the most important part of data, is getting it out there, using it, starting conversations, finding solutions, and figuring how it works on your campus. And there's so many different tools that Lightcast offers that can get you to that information faster and easier, so you can move on to the part which is the most important, which is using it to transform what you're doing for your students and therefore help them succeed well after graduation. I'm going to take a little bit of a pause there for a minute, because I know that most people are thinking right now, yeah, alumni surveys, they're really hard. How do I get people to respond to my alumni surveys? This is a question that if I had the perfect answer, I think I could make a lot of money, but I will give you what I've collected through 20 plus years of experience of doing surveys with alumni. And hopefully this will help. So there are two things that I have found and that the research will tell you actually impact whether someone answers a survey. And if you think about this, let's start at home with yourself. And when you decide to do a survey, you probably can find some tangible examples in your life of how this works. So the first one is salience, and that is, what does it have to do with me? So you can better get people to respond to a survey if you can tell them what is the purpose of the survey and why is that important to them. How will it affect them or the thing they care about? So it's hard with alumni. You can't be like, this is going to improve your experience. But usually alumni do care about the current students, how they can help out, how they can contribute back, how can they help your institution improve and change. They often care about those things. So what's important and how will the purpose of this get me there? Also, if someone feels socially responsible. So I feel it's important to me because I feel like I'm obligated, or I owe somebody, or they did so much for me, I want to do something for them. So getting that social responsibility going. How do we do that? We're going to talk about some strategies on the next page, but one of the best things I've found is that you have the person who they care about ask them to take the survey. For me, I'll go back to Mrs. Woods at Baldwin Wallace University. She ran the admissions department at the Conservatory of Music where I went, and I would do anything for that woman, just because of she had so much respect and reputation on our campus. If Mrs. Woods sent me an alumni survey today, I still would send it out. I would still reply in an instant. We all can identify those people on our campuses that alumni are connected to, that students are connected to. And the next piece is trust. This is especially important for historically marginalized populations. Oftentimes, trust is one of their number one factors. I need to trust that you're going to use this data well. I need to trust that you're going to use this data for the purpose that you're saying. I need to trust that you're going to protect my information and use it with integrity. If I've had past experiences where that didn't happen, then you need to rebuild trust with me before I'm willing to take the survey. So trust also plays a big important factor with saliency. The other thing to think about is cost-benefit analysis. If there's any economists out there or business folks, you're probably familiar with this idea. For a lot of us, that's like, how much time will this survey take and what do I get for it? So how do we translate that into actual survey responses? So do they see a value in taking the time to do it? Sometimes that's the purpose. Sometimes that's the incentive. Sometimes that's the I want to contribute back. Sometimes it's peer pressure. So it's if you try multiple things, you will hit different people depending on what the value is for them. Knowing how the data will be used is really important. I don't want to waste my time doing a survey that you're never going to do anything with. So knowing specifically what your plan is, why you want to use the data, how you're going to use the data, how do you think that data will impact things on the campus, is important to me because that will help me decide whether it's worth my time to do it. And is there a benefit that I care about? So again, is that an incentive? Is that I want to give back to the students? I can see how this can be valuable for different things. So those are all things that go into that 2 seconds of reasoning. When you get a link in your inbox, your brain's already processing all of these things at once. So here are some things you can do to increase survey response rates. The first one is connect them. So connect with, actually, no, I'm going to go back. Develop a plan. So one of the things that can really help is if it's not one person. No one person can get a strong response rate. And I know this because I'm often the person on a campus they turn to say, hey, you're really good at this survey stuff. But it takes more than that. It takes a village, especially with alumni surveys. So thinking about who your cross-institutional team can be. Sometimes you need people who have access to the data. That's logical, right? Your institutional research people or your alumni folks who can actually pull the contact list, right? But beyond that, you also need the deans who are interested in using the data. You need the communications and marketing people who know best how to reach people. You need those folks who alumni might respond to. Thinking about that as a cross-institutional team who can each take a piece of it and figure out how they can contribute, but that team has to know the why behind the survey. So if they're just appointed to the committee and show up, then they need to be invested in why do we need this? How is it going to contribute? Because they can better communicate that and better contribute if they understand those things. Use multiple outreach strategies. So it's not just send an email and cross your fingers anymore. We know that people are everywhere now. Some people check email, some people don't, some people skim it, some people look at it once a year. But we also know there's social media, lots of different choices for social media. There's also multiple layers of outreach that alumni offices do. So how do you strategically think about not just sending that survey out through an email or a couple emails and hoping and praying that people respond, but how do you layer that? How do you use connections on social media to get the word out? How do you tag people? How do you get faculty involved with, sharing social media posts and things like that to get those algorithms working for you? So if you think about it in multiple layers, you're going to get a higher response rate. And this is also true for student surveys. So you can use these same things for students that are there now too. Have the ask come from people that alumni know and respect. And sometimes that's pocketed, right? So sometimes you need to get down a little bit deeper and say, okay, this group of students are going to respond to this. But I've also had a lot of campuses who said, okay, we're going to send out 3 or 4 emails. We're just going to make sure that those 3 or 4 are from different people. So we know that this person's really well connected with our first generation students and our students of color. So we're going to make that the first email, right? And then we know this next one's really connected with the athletes. So we're going to, that's going to be the second person. And then we know that these folks are maybe really connected with the students and on the academic side of things. And so maybe that one's going to be a layered approach where, the business students get it from somebody and the art students get it from another person. And then the last one might be, somebody who's the mascot even, or somebody that's really important to your alumni. So thinking about it from that way, you can layer it up even without having to sort of slice and dice your emails all the time, because each one of those will hit different populations and speak to different people. The next one is incentivize things that alumni care about. So, Amazon gift cards, maybe they care about it, maybe they don't, not to pick on Amazon, any of those sort of generic things. But really think about what do they care about the most. Institutions have tried things like, if you're a big sports campus, tickets to sporting events, or if you're a big arts campus, and things like that, to theater event or music event. There have people been campuses who know that swag is a big deal for their alumni. They love to wear their alumni sweatshirts and all those things. So they'll do swag, signed, autographed, I work on a campus that has a Nobel Prize winner, and right now anyone will get anything to get his signature on something. So, an incentive of getting a signed, autograph with the Nobel Prize winner. So anything like that, we're a pretty nerdy campus. Think about what people care about and then find that incentive, because otherwise the generic ones are a waste of kind of time and money. And then also combine with other data sources. So don't put all your eggs in the survey basket. Think about what other data sources you have. How do they complement each other? And it doesn't always have to be from alumni, right? That Metro State example, they had current students, they had strategic planning data, which comes at, operational data and student data. They combined it with their first destination and their alumni in order to get a better picture. So thinking about how you complement the data along the way so that you can have a much better picture of what's going on. And that way you're not focused just on getting those alumni surveys. And now we're going to do a quick poll. And while you're doing the poll, I'm going to quick jump over to the Q&As and see if I can look at some of those and get some of those answered. And then I know some folks have asked about how to access the report. I know that it was put in the chat, but I can also put up a QR code at the very end. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And you just got instructions in the chat. You can jump on over to the poll tab to let everyone know how and if Lightcast can help. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to do that poll, and then I'll wrap up with questions. So as you're doing the poll, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A as well. I'm going to go ahead while you're doing the poll. If you'd like to download the report, I know the link is in the chat, but here's a quick QR code as well. You can snap a shot chat from. And then some questions. Again, if you have more, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. We did have one person ask, how is this survey different from the case survey? I don't know much about the case survey. I've given it a quick look. It's my impression that that's more about gathering insights into alumni donor and sort of capacity for donating, but it also looks like it has a few other things. I'd have to actually dig into it a little bit more to give you a really specific comparison. If you were interested, let me know, because I'd be more than willing to do that. I love looking at different surveys, so you can reach out to me if you'd like, and I can help you look through that. Any other questions? I don't see any more. So I'll stick on. If people do have questions, feel free. You can ask me. But if not, I want to thank you all for your time today. I hope you found this data valuable. And if you want to learn more, check out that report and stay tuned for more information, because we'll be pulling up this year's data soon in the summer. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.